You go through your videos when you're scrolling up your little piece of paper that you're doing all your notes on. And I've seen other comments. People, I'll reach out to my computer screen and try to scroll up faster. So
we live in the touch screen society.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, we're on. Yeah, Craig, thank you very much for coming on. It's great to talk to you. Can I just ask a quick favor? First of all, can we have a look outside your window?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, John. Here we go. I'll just
see where we are.
You let me see if let me know if it's clear for you.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, just give us a swizzle around so we can see there it is. Wow.
You can actually Fantastic. See Taipei 101 in the distance, which used to be the world's tallest building.
Right. Fantastic. So for those of us that don't know, Craig, where is this?
Okay, I'm sitting in, actually, my physical location is New Taipei City, but it's very closely connected to Taipei in Taiwan. And the area behind me that I just showed John is a neighborhood called Yonghe, New Taipei City. And you can Wikipedia it, and it's, I believe, the 4th or 5th most densely populated neighborhood in the world, with about 40,000 to 45,000 people per square kilometer living down there. It's a busy place.
So it's a busy city. Wow, yeah. So how long have you been in Taiwan, Craig?
I've been here since 2000 for 20 years. And,
wow.
Yeah.
Are you working there?
Working there. I have a company here. I'm doing manufacturing, product development, and export for overseas customers. All of my customers are based in other countries. And I'm based in dealing with the local factories and local vendors here.
Okay, cool. So presumably you need to speak a bit of, is it Mandarin there?
It's Mandarin, yes. Speaking, I'm fluent speaker, and I read and write Chinese as well, the Mandarin Chinese. So it's taken a lot of years and a lot of hard work, but
that is impressive. That is impressive. Yeah. So what's the situation there as of today, Craig, with COVID? I mean, how are things? How is your life affected? How are your workers affected?
Well, I guess I'll hit the first question that you asked. I just opened up the news today, and here's the headline. I'll read it right out to all your listeners. Taiwan sees 52nd day without a new local coronavirus case. So as maybe many of your viewers know, Taiwan is one of the countries that never shut down, as opposed to a stay-at-home type of order. We were quite strict with the people coming in from overseas and that type of thing, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, without shutting down, everybody's still been to school, attending classes, going to work, riding the subways, public transportation. And as of today, 52 days in a row without a local transmission. 2 days ago, there was a woman that came back from the United States that tested positive, but of course she's in isolation. And I think in total, since the pandemic started in, I guess January for all intents and purposes, Taiwan has had 443 total cases, and a total number of deaths is 7. And I think it's worth noting that all 7 of the people had some pretty serious comorbidities as well. So these were elderly people with some serious underlying health issues.
Now, how genuine is this data, Craig? Is this the official line of the government that it wants people to believe and things are actually way worse, or is the data from the government reliable in Taiwan?
It's absolutely reliable. I lived here during the SARS crisis, through MERS. We've had swine flu, bird flu, all of those types of things. I'm very active in the local community, and because I speak, read, and write Chinese, I've been going to the gyms, I've been golfing, all through all of this, and I'm speaking to everybody. If there was any serious problems, it would have been quite evident in that neighborhood behind me, and people would have been talking. The Taiwanese took this very seriously from the start. If you go outside, wearing masks are mandatory in public transportation, but I believe that's being lifted maybe as early as next week already. But as far as your question goes, the data, absolutely, I believe the data is 100% accurate, because otherwise it would be very apparent. I mean, I'm not in isolation here. I'm out and about in the community. I'm still dealing with vendors and factories and that type of thing. So I absolutely believe the data.
So the official figures and your day-to-day experience working in the area is completely consistent.
Completely consistent.
Yeah. So this sounds nothing short of a miracle. I mean, why is it that basically what we're saying is that the COVID-19 pandemic has basically bypassed Taiwan. What has Taiwan done that has been so successful in keeping this pandemic out of the country? It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. I think one of the keys is that once it was known that there was a pandemic happening, Taiwan immediately instituted a quarantine, a mandatory quarantine. I believe it started at the end of January, in the last week or around the end of January.
I think it was end of January, yeah.
Every person coming back into Taiwan, we have to remember this is around Chinese New Year. And there's something interesting to note as well. There's about 850,000 to 1 million Taiwanese people that live and work in mainland China. So all of those people were coming back for Chinese New Year. So what the government did when they discovered that this was quite a serious illness is that everybody returning was subjected to a 14-day stay-at-home order. So, thousands of people literally were quarantined at home for the 14 days. After that, they were free to leave. So I think that really got a handle on it. And anybody that tested positive was immediately hospitalized and isolated. Now, what accounted for out of the 400 people, the low number of deaths, I'm not too sure. I know you talked yesterday a little bit about there's maybe some thought in the medical community that Asian people aren't being as seriously affected about that. I don't really know. But I think the main thing at the start was the mandatory quarantine under heavy financial penalty. I think it was about $1,030,000 US was the penalty for breaking the quarantine. So it is a very serious
$30,000 US.
$30,000 US, a maximum fine for breaking the quarantine. But everybody took it seriously. The Taiwanese people took it seriously. And that was the start. That was the very start, in January, before a lot of other countries around the world even considered things as simple as mask wearing and isolation and that type of thing. So they
Some
really
of us still haven't got around to things as simple as mask wearing, unfortunately. It just beggars belief, actually, the attitude in the United Kingdom to masks.
Well, Western people, even in Taiwan, unfortunately, us Westerners have the reputation that we don't like to wear masks. But yesterday morning I went to my bank to do some banking, and masks are still mandatory there. Even though this morning I was out to a rather large shopping mall, and masks are not mandatory there.
So there was a very heavy financial penalty for breaking the quarantine, but is the population in Taiwan fairly compliant with regulations anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're really aware of the effect that other people can have on their lives as well. So there were a couple of people that broke quarantine, and it wasn't looked upon favorably by the local people in the community. Yeah. With social media and that type of thing, it's almost immediate, the backlash that the people felt. Now, it should be said, I had actually a really good friend of mine came in from Australia, him and his daughter, and they were quarantined. And the government you had to register on, we use LINE, we use Line a lot in Taiwan here. That's kind of the ubiquitous app that everybody uses. So the Taiwanese government, you had to register. You got a sort of a wake-up call every single morning at 6 a.m., I think, between 6 and 7. And if the person didn't immediately answer that Line message, they sent the police to the person's home where they were quarantined. And it happened to my friend one morning. He said there were 6 policemen at the door within 10 minutes of him not answering that Line message to see if he was actually still in quarantine. So everybody took it really, really seriously. Virtually everybody was compliant, and the outcome obviously is, we still have a very open and robust
So is Chinese New Year a big deal in Taiwan, the same as it is in the rest of China? It's a big cultural.
It's much more different here. I mean, it's a big travel time, but I mean, mostly for Taiwanese people to go overseas, maybe to go to, Japan or Hong Kong or the popular tourist destinations. Whereas in mainland China, it's a big migration for workers to go back to their families, and for maybe the children to give the hongbao or the red envelope to their parents, to give them the money. So it's in mainland China, it's a massive human migration. And so, but it's, depending on the lunar calendar, there could be 4 days off of work to maybe a full week off of work. But it's just basically, it's like Christmas holidays, back in the Western countries, that type of thing, or Easter break or something like that. Whereas mainland China, it's a major logistical movement of people and can affect factories and output in that for up to a month. But for here, it's not a place to play. Yeah.
But there were still many thousands of people flying back from China to Taiwan during that time period.
Oh, absolutely. And as far as I know, most of those 850,000 people, we call them Taishan here, the people doing business in China, are still here. And it's actually, I believe it's probably increased the local GDP a little bit as well, because I've noticed the gyms are much busier. The golf courses are much busier, that type of thing. So they're waiting for things to open up in mainland China so they can get back to running the factories and doing the business and that type of thing as well.
So it's hard to believe there's basically been no lockdown in Taiwan, and yet this incredible success story.
Yeah, no lockdown at all. I will say that Chinese New Year for school kids, the government extended it for 2 weeks. They extended the holiday for 2 weeks for the school kids, because nobody really knew what was happening at that time. It wasn't as apparent as it is now that younger people don't really get affected by this. But so my son, he's in grade 1 here. His his Chinese New Year vacation was extended by 2 weeks, but that will go into July. So they'll make up for those classes. But yeah, basically,
2 weeks. I mean, it's nothing. We've been off here for months. It's just.
Yeah, it's not, and that was only for the school kids, right? I mean, everybody.
Yeah.
And that type of thing.
Your workers have just been working through normally, receiving their wages as normal.
Well, some of the vendors, because I deal with a number of different factories, depending on what my customers are looking for, but they're quiet, obviously, because Taiwan is an exporting country. So some of the factories are working 3 days a week, 4 days a week, and that type of thing. But everybody's kind of positive, or the people that I've talked to know that this is a temporary thing, that we have to get through this, and eventually things are going to pick up again.
No, it's an amazing situation. I mean, why do you think it was that Taiwan was? It seems to me Taiwan was well prepared, good knowledge base. The people had a good understanding and were ready to comply. I mean, why was Taiwan so well prepared for this and able to just spring into action when even the hint of a threat was there?
I guess the biggest thing was the experience from the SARS epidemic, which would have been 2003, I believe. And up until that time, even in Taiwan, we had what's called the wet markets. People have been talking about these wet markets. And whereas you hear about the wet markets in China, where maybe they'll have a lot more exotic animals, there were no real exotic animals for sale in the wet market. In Taiwan, basically was a place we could go in the morning, and if you wanted to get a fresh chicken, the chickens would be sitting there in the cages, and the lady would, or the worker would eviscerate the chicken for you, and there was your fresh chicken. Even that aspect of the markets in Taiwan was stopped after the SARS crisis.
Oh, really? Right. So even though that was part of the Taiwanese culture, it was all stopped.
It was stopped at that time, so there were no more wet markets, what they call wet markets. You could still get fresh fish and everything, really fresh meat, but it's just not butchered on site. That type of thing.
So it was all done humanely and hygienically in dedicated facilities, as opposed to
that's right,
the haphazard on the street, blood on the tiles sort of
thing. yeah, that type of thing. So that was done away with, and Taiwan was hit particularly hard during that SARS crisis. If you remember, Taiwan and I think Toronto, Canada, there were quite a few deaths, but there was travel back and forth between the two places. So that's the number one reason. And I mean, we have a president that's, I mean, I consider her brilliant. She's just, you know, she's an action taker, and our vice president is an epidemiologist by trade. So we have a medical person in his second in command, so to speak. And I guess they weren't, this pandemic seemed to be a lot of media driven. There was a lot of media driven hype and fear and clickbait type of thing. And I think that maybe predicated a lot of behavior by overseas politicians one way or the other. And it seemed like Taiwan wasn't affected by that. They did what needed to be done. The people complied with what needed to be done, and that was it. And it seemed remarkably simple, and now that we're getting into hindsight, of course, we don't know what herd immunity has been developed here. They're just going to start doing antibody testing. Actually, I think this week they've announced it, large-scale antibody testing to see how far this virus is penetrated into the community. But I think because Taiwan is sort of a standalone in its own, and with the SARS experience, they just knew what had to be done. They were really well prepared for it, and they just did it.
Isn't it great having scientists, doctors, nurses in government? I think we just need that all around the world. More technical people in government would just be. I think it would be a great thing.
Absolutely. I can't. For me, I'm clearly biased because the lockdowns and the effect that it's had on especially I'm a small business person, but it's had small businesses worldwide. To me, it's a tragedy. Because obviously, if Taiwan, with close to 1 million people living and working in China, didn't have to close down economically, I really don't believe the rest of the world had to as well. I think there's other outlying reasons, and you'll probably have your hypotheses on these as well, as to why in America, for example, such a high number of people succumb to this disease, whereas in other countries maybe it was a little bit more, but that's maybe a different reason. But as far as the lockdown goes, it really didn't need to happen if proper measures were put in place. And like you've mentioned before, and you've been mentioning a lot lately, the mask wearing, which is very much a part of Taiwan culture.
And anyway, yeah, people wear masks anyway.
They wear them all the time to protect themselves from their vehicle pollution and that type of thing, and maybe protect from the sun and that type of thing. So it's just part of everyday life here for people.
What really gets me about this, Craig, is we're paying people like community health physicians and public health authorities and people that are supposed to guard us from this kind of stuff, and they've completely failed. It has to be said, and yet you've got the same people reading the same textbooks, presumably in Taiwan, who've got it right. It's just bemusing that we've got it so wrong, that the people that are supposed to guard us from this sort of thing, including the World Health Organization, have just completely dropped the ball on this. And yet Taiwan shows that it can be done with 7 deaths in just a few hundred cases in a country of 22 million people.
Yeah, 22 or 23 million. Yeah. I mean, politics aside, I guess, a lot of times local politicians are the people you speak about. Maybe they feel they need to make a decision to make it look like they're making a decision and taking action, but it's not necessarily the most informed or best action that should be taken, even though they're clearly examples of what's working, and how it can be done to a stringent measure. I think Sweden did the no lockdown, but I don't know if they were as adamant about the mandatory 14-day quarantine for people coming into the country, that type of thing. So.
Yeah, I think the jury's kind of still out on that one. Really, it's there's some signs that it isn't looking too good. But I mean, Taiwan, just as basic public health measures, basic preventative measures. You haven't got any vaccines. You haven't got any clever drugs.
No, we have no feathered dogs here.
No, you've no secret keeping from us here, Craig, is there?
I don't think so. You can tell by my skin color. I get a lot of sun, and I know we've been talking. There's been a lot of talk about vitamin D.
You get some vitamin D, yeah.
Well,
what is the culture there actually? Do people sunbathe in Taiwan, or is it sort of they tend to keep out the sun?
No, it's not a sunbathing culture. It's similar to what the young lady said about Japan yesterday. The women here, especially, really avoid the sun. The men, I mean, of course, men are different. The men aren't as afraid from them. But there's a social and cultural aspect to it, as well as maybe what a lot of people feel in the West, the danger aspect. But mostly it's just for aesthetics and beauty that they really don't go out in the sun.
Yeah.
Younger people, of course, more than the older generations, but it's not a sunbathing culture.
Yeah, interesting. So, what's daily life like in Taiwan in terms of nutrition for most people? Is everyone fairly well nourished, or is there problems in that area?
Oh, the markets here are just amazing, John. I mean, I have a sister back in Canada, and I'll send her pictures of like we say, I call them the morning markets, right? There's dedicated streets as you go through. A lot of Asian communities or late Asian countries are like that. So there'll be a market street that's open from 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's fresh produce and fresh fruit, and as far as the eye can see. So it's an absolutely brilliant country for getting healthy food and from the farm that morning.
Right? And is it affordable?
Oh, it's very affordable and absolutely affordable.
So nutrition is not, even poorer people eat well in Taiwan.
No, it's very affordable country to eat well.
And what about housing? I mean, we mentioned that the population density around you is quite high. I mean, is the sanitation fairly good? Are the families living in close proximity, or?
In the last 20 years I've been here, it's the improvements have been absolutely astounding. The recycling rate, I believe Taiwan was number 1 or number 2 in the world for recycling. So everybody separates their garbage, the glass, the paper, everything's put into the different recycling bins. We have to use dedicated, in Taipei City, dedicated garbage bags that you have to pay a tax on, so that it encourages people not to put everything into the trash, but to actually physically
recycle them. Yeah.
So when I first came 20 years ago, it was a little bit grittier, I have to say, than it is now, but it's absolutely astounding. It's clean city. I mean, it's busy, obviously, with the population density like that. There's a lot of trash generated, but people are generally pretty good, really good about separating and taking care of that and not throwing trash out onto the street and that kind of.
So it sounds like air pollution is probably one of the main problems that you've still got there.
Yeah, we monitor. I mean, it's monitored quite closely, but northern Taiwan, where I am in Taipei, it's not too bad. The central area where there's a lot of manufacturing, the air tends to get quite severe. And we do actually, the influence, we'll get dust storms and that sweeping through from China, because the prevailing winds in the wintertime and that type of thing will bring pollution across the Taiwan Strait, which is only 60 miles wide, and will be affected that way as well. But yeah, that's probably the biggest concern would be. But it's, I mean, if you have viewers that have been to heavily polluted cities, it's not like that at all.
Mm-hmm. Is there an electric bike culture there, the same as there is in mainland China?
No, not as much. We're still mostly with the scooters. The gas-powered scooters are sort of ubiquitous in Taiwan. We do have what started out as a local manufacturing concern called Gogoro. I don't know if the Gogoros have hit it to England. I know they're in Europe, but that's sort of the number 1 electric scooter that people are starting to use here. And there are a couple of other companies now that are starting to use them. But speaking to little local sellers and manufacturers, they haven't caught on quite as much yet because of the problem of changing batteries and the charging and that type of thing. So not like if you've been to China, the first time I went a few years ago, the electric bikes were everywhere, and I thought it was brilliant.
Oh yeah, I love them. Yeah, I want one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot more here. You see a lot more on the road, and a lot of EVs, a lot of electric vehicles, but not to that extent. But they are becoming more and more popular.
Right. What's the law and order like there? Is it safe for you and your family to walk out in the evenings? And
Japan is consistently rated the safest country in the world, and Taiwan is number 2. It's unbelievably safe.
So you're pretty comfortable walking out at any time. You're not going to get mugged or anything like that. It's not.
Yeah, there's no local. You know, I'll tell you a funny little story, a little anecdote.
Yeah.
My son, I went to the gym 2 days ago or last week, I think, and I had his skateboard with me, and I left it outside the local 7-Eleven. I went in to get a drink or something, and I forgot it there. And 3 days later, my son went, "Where's my skateboard, Dad?" I had to go back through my memory, and oh my goodness, I left it outside the 7-Eleven, and I went back there, and it was sitting there 3 days later.
Wow, on a busy street.
Yeah, you can. You know, when I first moved here, I would see people going to like outdoor coffee shops, and you know, when I come from Saskatchewan in Western Canada, which is not a densely populated place by any means. And I would see people take their backpacks or their bags and just put them on an outside table and then walk into the coffee shop and browse around and leave their bags. And how can you do that? And, you know, you would ask them, well, you know, is it going to be safe? And they would just look at you with a quizzical look. Well, why would somebody steal my bag? It's mine. You know, so that type of thing. You know, it's like Japan in that sense. Yeah, street crime is very, very low. It's really, really safe.
It's just the way it should be, isn't it? It's just brilliant.
That's absolutely it is. It's just the way it should be. It's a great place to raise, you know, raise a child because they don't have to. You know, of course, you raise children to be aware of dangers that can lurk in any society, but there's not that overhanging air of
the sort of lurking fear of
the lurking fear. I mean, you know, I spent a lot of time. I lived in Scotland, as a matter of fact. I lived in the UK for a while, and I actually have dual citizenship. I'm a British citizen as well. But I know there's areas in London that I, you know, was in 20 years ago that I would come out of the tube station and sort of look around and say, this feels a little bit dodgy. But yeah, you don't really do that here. So
amazing, yeah. So, what's the plans for the next sort of months and the next few months? I guess just plan on with. So you mentioned the antibody testing that they're going to roll out.
Yes,
I would imagine that the antibody levels are pretty low because basically the country's managed to keep the infection out pretty well.
Well, this is something that, you know, I think about a lot. Is that apparently this virus sort of started in late November. You know, if we can trust the news sources. And at that time, I mean, there are literally hundreds of flights a day back and forth from Taiwan to mainland China. People are constantly coming and going. And, you know, anecdotally speaking with my friends, I haven't had a cold probably for 15 years, even so much as a sore throat. But there was a period in January where for about 3 or 4 days, I was exhausted, absolutely physically exhausted. And I couldn't really understand it other than, you know, in those times I'll just tell myself, oh, your body needs a rest, so just take a good rest. And I've talked to some other people as well, and we felt that, you know, people had sore throats and went through this extreme fatigue. Perhaps it has gone through the community in some sense, but we would think that if that was the case, a lot of older people maybe would have been affected as well in a more serious. And that it hasn't seemed to happen.
That didn't happen, yeah.
Yeah, as I said, the Zhonghua County, which is south of Taipei, they're going to test 10,000 people. They're working with one of the universities, medical universities. They're going to test.
Is that happening now?
Sorry?
That's happening now.
They just announced it yesterday, so they're going to start that, and they just want to see what kind of penetration the virus has in the community. As far as other actions that are taken, the Taiwan government is working closely with Stanford University in the United States, and they're actually going to do an experiment. I believe they're letting 500 people come to Taiwan on a sort of trial tourist basis, and what they're trying to determine is the safest, lowest number of days that overseas travelers could be quarantined upon entry to Taiwan, because they really want to open up the the country again, not only to travelers, but to business travelers. It's quite important. One of the other things they're looking at is sort of an umbrella or a group of countries, like safe travel countries.
Yeah, average, yeah.
Average New Zealand, Vietnam, I believe, or Thailand, Vietnam, and Australia. Sort of maybe free travel within those countries as well, just to start to get things moving again. So they're taking baby steps, but they're definitely as proactive as they were at the beginning. The government's being as proactive right now to try to get everything opened up again.
And those 10,000 tests should give a fairly definitive answer, as long as it's 10,000 people that are randomly chosen. That's a very good sample, and that should. I mean, your symptoms, Craig, certainly do sound suspicious. The extreme tiredness there. That's one. What about anyone reporting loss of smell for a period of time?
Oh, that was an interesting thing. And when this happened, this was in mid-January. I think this was actually either around Chinese New Year's or just before that. And because I'm a very active type of person, and the one day I was with my son, and I just literally I didn't have the energy to get off the sofa, and I couldn't figure it out. But the sense of smell, I don't think I really noticed it. Now, I was a hockey player for many years, and I've had my nose broken a few times, so I don't have the sense of smell to begin with. But my sense of taste definitely didn't disappear, that I recall anyway.
The extreme fatigue is certainly a feature, and it would be fascinating for you to have an antibody test and to find that out.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing that they're doing, is that just this week they announced that testing is available to anybody for a fee. It's not part of the national health insurance that we have here, but they're still prioritizing the test. But because I have an international company here and travel as part of my business, I could go to the hospital tomorrow if I wanted and ask for a test. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for travel to open up a little bit, and once this other test has been taken care of, then definitely I'm going to go and get an antibody test as well, because I'd like to, if it's the case, I'd like to have the piece of paper anyway, and if not, then I know maybe I need to take the hospital to travel.
Yeah, getting tested today, getting the antigen test is probably of limited value. You almost certainly haven't got it today. But the question is, have you had it in the past, and what level of immunity does that give you? And it's looking like people don't get infected with this virus twice. That's where the current data seems to be pointing. Right. So even though the World Health Organization and governments around the world are very reluctant to say people are immune, I think that's where the sort of balance of science is heading. So, from what I know at the moment, I think it's likely if you have had it and you do have the antibodies, you'll have a fair degree of immunity. We don't know for how long, but
yeah, just like anything else, if we've had it, hopefully that immunity would last.
Well, absolutely, yeah. There's the odd exception to that. I mean, dengue is one where if you get reinfected with another type of dengue, it can make you sicker. But that's a pretty weird, unusual disease anyway at the best of times. So. Yeah. So I think that's great, Craig. Is there anything else you think we should know? I mean, it's basically, I mean, I think what's happening is Taiwan is going to remain disease-free until you get a vaccine.
It seems like it now. Of course, once things start opening up, I guess once they determine the proper length of quarantine, if any, that will be required for the people. I'm still a little bit concerned because Taiwan really did keep the disease out. Is there going to be something happening once travel resumes en masse, or is there going to be enough of a immunity with the people coming from outside that maybe there's not a threat as well?
And if they're testing at the airports and things, I mean, is there a good sort of what are the medical facilities like in Taiwan? Is it pretty good, or?
I believe, and I've lived in Canada, I've lived in the UK, Japan, and Taiwan. I believe it's probably the best healthcare system I've ever seen, I've ever experienced.
So you could walk out to an emergency department now and see a doctor quite readily if you needed to.
Oh, absolutely. If I remember, because I'm a little bit active in sports, I think I injured my knee a few years ago, and we wanted to do an MRI. And when you talk about an MRI, generally it's okay, book it now and come back in 3 months. And And so I asked the doctor, well, when can I get that done? He said, well, just go downstairs, do it now, and come back up. So if that's just one story. That's how good it is.
Just pop downstairs and get an MRI. Yeah, marvelous.
Yeah, that's how good it is.
So and did they have like a biomedical industry there? Is the people? Are you developing a vaccine in Taiwan? Do you know?
Well, if there's a vaccine that's going to get developed, there's a good chance that the Taiwanese people could work on it. They've already isolated. I'm not a medical person, so I can't really speak to that, but definitely there's a high-tech industry here.
Yeah, there's a biotech industry there that does this kind of stuff.
So for the antibody testing, I know there's companies working on more rapid testing and that type of thing. So I truly believe that the day will come in the not too distant future for travel that will either get maybe a mouth swab, like you said, or a little finger prick at the airport. It'll tell you within a minute whether you're disease-free, or as we talked about, if you have the antibody, maybe you have the little piece of paper that allows you, free travel. So it seems like that's probably for the not too distant future that we will need to go. And so, like SARS, like MERS, like the swine flu, and these other ones, maybe it just eventually passes.
Yeah, and you can sit tight till you get a vaccine. I mean, is there a lot of older people in Taiwanese society? Is it what's the sort of over?
Yeah, I believe it would probably match Japan, sort of.
As old as that?
Yeah, on par with that, because the birth rate here, as in Japan, has been declining. I think it's actually pretty much zero right now. So Taiwan society definitely is getting older. So there's a high elderly population here. So if the virus did come, or if it had come into our country, it could have been quite serious.
It's going to be fascinating to find out the result of this antibody test, Craig. My hunch is not many people there have had it, but from what you describe, I'm really curious as to whether you have. I mean, will you let us know when you get the result?
Yeah, I'll send you the link to the English news article, and once the results come out, I'll keep you posted, because we have our emails now. We've exchanged emails, so I'll make sure.
I'm sure lots of people like me around the world are curious. Has Craig had the antibodies or not? We want to know. if you choose to disclose that medical information, of course.
And this is what I expect from you, John, in a future podcast. After I send you that information, I want you to slip a little white piece of paper up, and at the bottom of it, there's going to be antibody positive or negative, and then
absolutely, yeah. I had an idea recently. We could the civil liberties people will go nuts on this, but I was thinking people that are a particular risk, that need to be guarded and haven't been infected, they could have a red hat. And people that are immune and have had it could have a green hat.
Oh, I thought you were going to go red and blue with that one. I was a little bit. At the moment.
I'm sure we could have a blue hat for people that haven't been infected. I think. But no, I mean, certainly, I don't think anyone would object to the idea that people that were at particular risk had a red hat. I mean, I think that's pretty safe. But yeah, this idea of immunity certificate is coming. So I think one of the big things that's been successful there is the app. I think people from your knowledge of Canadian culture, would people in Canada accept the app that the Taiwanese people have accepted for contact tracing?
Yeah, when I believe they were talking about it in the UK, and it seemed to be a lot of big pushback. I mean, I don't know if people understand that our cell phones are tracking us constantly and
anyway,
information anyway. So as far as that, I mean, what they did for the app for the quarantine was basically just keep track of the people that were supposed to be quarantined. So I would hope that people would accept that. Now, the other thing that the CDC, the Taiwan CDC, did is if there was a person that was quarantined in the neighborhood, you would get an alert on your phone saying that the home is on this street. Now, the street could be a kilometer long. But so I had a couple of alerts come up on my phone saying that this neighborhood, this area, this street, there's a quarantine person and that type of thing. So just to let people be aware that this is still happening. And maybe make the neighbors sort of pay a little bit more attention.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I mean, my impression is, and this is just me thinking out loud, really, that most people in the UK would probably accept it.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Most people in the US, I think, probably wouldn't. I might be being unfair there, but I mean, Canada, I'm not so sure. I would guess in the UK about 60% of people would accept it.
Yeah, I think Canadians are pretty easygoing people. I mean, they seem to have accepted the homestay with the lockdown quite well, even though obviously, I mean, for a financial basis, everybody wants to get back to work. But I think
sure,
pretty much accepted. The U.S. is a little bit of a different country in that their sense of personal freedom is unquestioned acceptance. So.
Yeah, there's other problems in the States at the moment as well, unfortunately, with the
there's some other ones there, absolutely.
The other issues that are going on, yeah. Craig, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. Just a remarkable insight into what's going on in Taiwan. It's I hope you and your family and your businesses stay well till you get a vaccine. I'm sure you will, by the sounds of it.
I'll share the information. I have been a keen follower of yours, and like I said, I keep trying to scroll up that little piece of white paper you moved from the desk on my computer.
I'll try and recruit a technician and see if we can work out a way to do that.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, John, and you take care.
No, thanks, Craig. Thanks very much. I'll just stop this recording. Thanks, Craig. Thanks.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, you too.